Hey, so I'm going to be doing the barrel assembly here in CAD because I don't have all of the parts needed to do it with video. So just to start off here, you're going to need the barrel base printed and the barrel midsection. The barrel midsection for 90% of you is going to be the 250 millimeter one. That's Ender 3 height. My printer is a Prusa, which is only 210, I believe. So I have to use the shorter one. But you guys should all be using the larger 250 millimeter Z height midsection. And if you do print out the shorter one, you'll also need a threaded barrel. I'm not going to show that in here. It's in the instructions. Once you get this part, you'll know how to do it for the other ones. So to start off, basically you're going to need epoxy in those bottles. If you got the parts kit from me, there are two bottles. One with the actual epoxy and one with the hardener, and that should come out to 0.5 ounces when mixed together. So that's the one you'll need for this first step, the one with the most epoxy in it. Basically you'll need some paper towel and a steel wool. So basically I would start off with just shoving some paper towel in this end of the barrel base. Let's see, I'll rotate around so you can see one end is flat and one end has this hole in it. So you're going to be wanting to work on this whole end. And you also need you need the barrel pipe too. So basically, cap up this end. You're going to be pouring epoxy into this groove here, so you don't want that to seep into the barrel, the rifling section of the barrel. So plug that up with paper towel or whatever you have, and yeah, make sure it's compressed down too. Once you get that, you're going to take before that, well, actually not before that, sorry. You're going to want to take the pipe and just make sure that it fits into the barrel. It should be able to go most of the way down without any issues. And once you know that it fits, if it doesn't fit, you might need to sand down the inside of the barrel a little bit, the barrel base. You might also need to take off an elephant's foot, although it should have been printed in the other direction with no elephant's foot here. So once you know that the pipe fits in there and everything is plugged up, go ahead and mix the epoxy. If you got the parts kit from me, it's going to be pre-measured out. So you just mix the complete bottles together. I would try to mix it in a separate container, just pour them both together, mix it up. It's a pretty slow setting epoxy, so you have time to work with it and make sure it's completely mixed. I think it says 20 minutes until it starts hardening, but I think it's more like 30. But either way, you got time. So mix that up and pour almost all of it into this cutout here. You can just pour it directly on top of the paper towel and it'll flow into the gaps. And then once you have most of that most of that poured in, you can rub any that's left in your whatever you mixed it in. You can rub that on the outside and as far as you can on the inside of the pipe too. That'll just help make sure that there aren't any dry spots on the surface. So then once that's all mixed up, you can just go ahead and insert it in as far as you can. Let's go ahead and take a look at a side view here. As you can see, nothing crazy going on. It's literally just a cutout going most of the way down. So you're going to want to push it down. Should be able to do it with your hands. And then once it gets to the most of the way down, you'll start feeling resistance at about here. That's when the epoxy is getting pushed up and around the pipe section. You want to start going a little bit slower once you hit that resistance, just so it flows up nice and evenly around it. And then right at some point you'll also have it coming out of the sides here. That might get a little bit messy, so make sure you have some paper towels around to clean that up. And then continue pushing all the way down. Once you think you hit the end, give it a little bit of a twist just to make sure that you're at the end. And yeah, twist while you're pushing down. And then once that is set there, let's go ahead, constrain it. All right, so that should be set flush with that bottom section of the barrel there. And now you have this, and there's going to be a lot of epoxy pooled in this area. You're just going to want to let that sit for a minute or two. You don't want the epoxy to dry, but you want the bubbles. There's going to be a lot of bubbles in here. You just want them to float up to the top, and then this pool of epoxy here will basically give it some excess to fill those voids created by the bubbles moving up. So you want to keep a little bit there for, I mean, technically as long as you can, but you don't want it to harden. So I would say 2 or 3 minutes maybe. Really just eyeball it however long you're willing to wait staring at it. So once that is set, you're going to want to take a ramrod and push another piece of paper towel up through there and push out that plug. Push all that out. There's going to be a lot of really messy epoxy in there. You're going to want to, I would run another ramrod with a clean paper towel through again. Make sure no epoxy is on the resin. And then you're going to want to take a paper towel to the inside of the pipe, and you're going to want to take paper towel to the outside too. Basically just clean up any excess resin. The only resin you want is going to be inside this cavity here, around the gaps of the pipe. So yeah, that is the first section of the steps. Now you're just going to want that to sit and dry. It should dry in a couple hours. You can probably move on to the next step in a couple hours. Personally, I just leave that for a day to dry and move on to the stock assembly. But yeah, I'll continue with the top section of the barrel here now. Alright, so now I'm going to be talking about the chamber assembly. So you're going to need this chamber piece and the receiver, the barrel probe. And you should already have this steel pipe epoxied into this section. You don't need threaded rods, so you're just going to be working on this end of the barrel. The first step is going to be finding this little divot point. It's only on one side, so find that and drill through it. I would use a 7/64 drill bit if you have it, otherwise 3mm I believe in metric, and yeah, it's a number 6 screw. I believe if all else fails, an 1/8 inch drill bit will also work, but you preferably a little bit smaller. So drill straight through it. Don't really need any jigs. It doesn't need to be straight. It just needs to go from this hole into the chamber. Just don't wiggle it too much. You want to avoid the hole being too big, but it doesn't need to be straight. So once you drill the hole through it, then you're going to want to take the number 6 the number 6 tap and handle. It's a little device that basically makes threads into things. So we're going to be using that to thread the metal piece to make sure that the screw, the barrel probe, can be sealed in there and secured. So take that threaded rod, or take the tap and twist it. You're going to want to do about 180-degree rotation once you start digging into the metal, and then you're going to want to go back about 90 degrees to break the chips off, and then continue again 180 degrees and back 90. So you kind of have to go back and forth. You just don't want to do like more than 1 or 2 complete turns without backing it out, because that can break off the tap inside of the barrel. If that happens, you might have to re-drill another hole next to it. If the tap is far enough in, you might actually just be able to use the tap itself as the barrel probe. But yeah, if that happens, just let me know, I guess. So tap all the way through the chamber, just through one wall. Like your tap should just go halfway down here. You don't want to start tapping into the other half section of the barrel. So once you have that tap, then you can take the chamber probe, or the barrel probe, and this one you'll know is the right one because it should have a little bit of a chamfer. This one, actually, while I talk, I'll just put a chamfer in. Maybe you guys can see something about CAD if you ever wanted to learn Inventor. So you're just gonna add chamfer there, and then, so yeah, it's gonna be a little bit pointy. That's good. So you're gonna screw it in about halfway. Sorry, not halfway. just screw it in and make sure that it goes through, and then screw it back out. You just want to make sure that it was tapped correctly. Now I forgot to add the chamber checking gauge. I believe that's it. All right. So now we got the assembly gauge, and you're gonna want to fit it in just like that. Make sure, it doesn't really matter in or out, you just want to make sure that this cylindrical section is inside this chamber. So now that you know the screw can go through, mix up some epoxy. You can use some basic epoxy, just the 2-part stuff in the tubes in the miscellaneous parts bag. If you got the parts kit from me, otherwise just some basic epoxy from the hardware store. The barrel epoxy is more expensive. It's really nice and thin, so I don't want to overuse that. So get some regular ass epoxy in there, smear it in the hole, smear it on the probe, and then screw it in. And you're going to want to screw it in until it is touching this barrel probe. That's a little bit too far. You want it just barely touching there, and you want to be able to move in and out the barrel probe without it scraping on the probe. And once it's set in place, just leave it there for the epoxy to harden. And then once the epoxy hardens, you're just going to take a Dremel tool and cut off right about there, just to get it flush with the round part of the barrel. You can also, if you want, kind of dig a groove in there and get it deep. You basically just need a metal contact, but then if you get a groove in there, it'll help the receiver probe when it screws down into there. It'll also help hold the barrel in place in case you forget the what the fuck are these called? Nuts at the end. It's just basically an extra retention mechanism, which honestly, they're both kind of redundant. Friction alone will probably work to hold the barrel in. And so once you get that in, you can go ahead and take the chamber. You're gonna want to take out the chamber probe. I can just go ahead and delete that probably. I'll move it out of the way. You're gonna want to take the chamber, and I would put it in like maybe just halfway and make sure that it fits. It's going to be a really tight fit, so if you go in too far, you're not going to be able to get it out. So just put it in like halfway. When you start feeling it being really tight, you can either sand it down more if you want, or just hammer it. Actually, sorry, just put it in and check. If you want to sand it because it's too tight, you can, and then take it back out. And then you want to, I should say, if it is really tight, you can always hammer it in. It shouldn't cause any issues. It might just scrape some of the insides of the barrel off, but it doesn't matter too much. So put some epoxy around this chamber and inside the chamber of the barrel, and then slide this in there. You'll almost definitely need like a hammer or something to get it at like this point. So then just hammer, hammer, hammer. Not too hard, I guess, that you don't want to break anything, but get it in there. And then it should be flush with the edge of the barrel. And yeah, and you'll have some epoxy probably pooled in there. I would just take a Q-tip and remove it. Probably wouldn't hurt to smear some extra epoxy around the inside of there, around the screw, but make sure there's still metal exposed at the tip. Other than that, that is the chamber assembly. Alright, so now we're going to continue with the assembly on the barrel midsection. It's pretty much just doing the same thing, but now you have this other piece hanging off the pipe. So you're going to go ahead and mix let me check here, it's the 0.3, I believe. It doesn't really matter. It's the one smaller than the 0.5 epoxy. Yeah, 0.3 ounce. There should be, again, 2 bottles, 1 hardener, 1 resin, taped together. Just go ahead and mix those up pretty thoroughly and try not to get many air bubbles in it. And then I should say also plug up the hole again like you did last time. Put some paper towel in there. You can also, it might be helpful to put the barrel checker in there. If you print that, it's basically just a chunk of rifling that sets the 2 barrel pieces aligned, but you don't really need that because the 2 holes on on either side, you're going to be threading these number 8 threaded rods through them to keep everything aligned too. So barrel checker is not too important, but make sure you just plug up that barrel, this one, and also plug up this end of this barrel too. It should be upside down, meaning that all of the resin should be trying to flow into this barrel, but I would still plug up this one just in case. So got them plugged. Then you mix up the epoxy and go ahead and pour the epoxy into here. The reason that there's less epoxy that you need is because it's a little bit shorter section here that goes into. So once you have the resin poured in there, you can go ahead and flip this upside down. Actually, we're gonna have to unground this and ground this one, because this should be sitting on the ground. So you're going to align, what's going on here? Oh, that's, all right, there we go. All right, so got the epoxy poured in, everything sealed up. Now you're gonna just push that in there like that. Let's see, let's add some constraints, make it more realistic. So now you'll see this can twist, but you need these two holes lined up to each other. I'll show you the inside here, and as you can see, it doesn't really matter. So the rifling's lined up here, and then if you turn it around 180 degrees, you'll see that the rifling is lined up too. So it doesn't matter as long as, and yeah, now they're misaligned. So as long as the two holes are concentric, you're good to go. So let's put constraint on that. All right, so now everything's perfectly lined up. So again, you're going to be pushing the barrel or the pipe and the barrel base down into it. You'll feel some resistance some of the way down. Start pushing slower, and then you're going to get a lot of resin oozing out of here that you might need to wipe up. And then take the two 18-inch rods you're using for the barrel and put them in here. And then you're going to want to take a cordless drill and, or corded, I guess it doesn't matter, just tighten up the drill, the chuck of the drill around the threaded rods and spin it, and basically just drill it in. It should go in pretty easily, and then it might actually just go straight through depending on your printer tolerances. It doesn't technically need to thread in. You're just kind of using them as posts to keep it aligned. And then if you want, there are some nuts around. I guess take half section view off. You can also take two of the number 8 nuts and thread them on to tighten it up. You don't want it to be too tight, otherwise it'll bend, I guess, or start flexing. So just make sure it's tight enough. And yeah, other than that, that's pretty much, oh no, because you still have resin hardening on the inside in the barrel plugs. So you're going to want to take the ramrod and ram out the plugs, go from push from the barrel base to that there shouldn't be any resin on the rifling on the barrel base, but you'll probably get some on the rifling of the barrel midsection. So just push it through and then get all the goopy paper towels out, and then push some clean paper towels through. I would push like 3 or 4, and then I would push some steel wool through there just to make sure it gets in all the little cracks and stuff, and then push another piece of paper towel through it, and then you should have a completely clean barrel of any resin. And if you do, I mean, a little bit of a resin coating, as long as you ran through it with a paper towel, won't matter much. It'll just flake off during firing. And yeah, then let it sit. I would be careful about the threaded rods, as there's going to be some resin inside of these holes which can cure around the rods. I haven't had had an issue yet taking them out, but you might run into it. I foresee it as a problem in the future. So once it starts hardening, I would give it about 20 minutes, actually longer than that. I would say at about an hour. It's not going to be hard yet, it's just going to be hardening. I would thread the threaded rods through a little bit more, just like this. Thread them pretty much as far as you can maybe, and that should, any resin that was cured onto it should be now down here, and you can wipe that off. And then that way when the resin does cure, it's not curing these posts in place. And then once it does cure, you can just thread them back out with the